Today's episode is all about the employee experience, and we're providing best practices for appreciating and rewarding your employees. From EngageMint, I'm David Millay, and this is Flip the Switch. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Flip the Switch, where we sit down with leaders in customer experience and employee experience, and we try to figure out what are the trends that they're paying attention to, what are the experiments that they're running, what are the principles that have driven success for them throughout their career. Then we take all those insights and we apply them to the world of sports and entertainment. Now, in today's episode, we are going to be sitting down with Dr. Paul White, who is an expert in employee experience, specifically around the areas of appreciation and recognition. And we're going to go deep here into unpacking and defoliating one of his more recent books, which is The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Now, Dr. White wrote this book with Dr. Gary Chapman, and if you're a big relationship guru or you study that space a lot, you might recognize Dr. Gary Chapman's name as the author of The 5 Love Languages. So if you've ever heard your spouse talk about that, we're going to kind of unpack and make ties to the 5 love languages to really how you appreciate your employees in the workspace. Now, this is a really unique episode because, again, we're going to dive deep into how you as a leader can better recognize and appreciate your employees so that ultimately you can create a more productive workforce. And this is a topic that's really important and hits home for us here at EngageMint, because one of the products that we developed over the pandemic is a really robust recognition program, complete with digital and physical elements to it. And we've been working with different organizations like University of Texas, Penn State, Austin FC to implement these rewards and recognition programs to ultimately drive key behaviors. So if you're interested in learning more about what that looks like, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at David Millay, or feel free to email us hello@engagementpartners.com, or my email davidm@engagementpartners.com. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Dr. Paul White so we can unpack some best practices that you can apply to your organization around the areas of recognition and appreciation. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
I am excited to jump in on this topic around employee experience, recognition, appreciation, topics that are super, super relevant for every leader in the space right now. Why don't we start with this question around how has employee engagement really become the kind of focal point for people that are leaders that are in the business right now? I mean, how have things changed in the last couple of years around employee engagement?
Well, it's actually been changing before that as well, but it sort of hyper changed in the last couple of years. Whereas, most business and organizational leaders were focused on, getting tasks done, the profitability, and sort of the hard kinds of metrics for businesses. And for a long time, they were able to focus on that. But as our culture has changed, as younger employees have come in with different sets of values and goals, if they want to keep those employees, leaders need to change. And so it's more towards how do we keep our team members satisfied or engaged? And engaged meaning they're not only there physically, but they're there, mentally and emotionally as well. So they're not just going through the motions. And so for a while, it was sort of, employee recognition, give them a certificate or maybe a little gift or something. And then pretty quickly it moved away from that because it didn't feel real genuine. It was very impersonal and just sort of generic for everybody. To, with COVID and people working from home, we found out that people need connectedness with one another, not only about work tasks, but also about their personal life. Because when we're in the office or in the same setting, we'll chat about the game last night or how our kids did this weekend and so forth. When you're on Zoom calls and meetings, there's not much room for that unless you really structure it. And so people started to feel like, people only ask me about work, and it's like they don't care about me at all. And so that's why we've had sort of this transition of people choosing maybe to change where they're working and what they're doing.
Yeah. So, and I think we affectionately call it the Great Resignation, is how I've heard it termed in many places. There are a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think actually somebody suggested to me it might be the Great Migration. It's not that people are just pulling out of the workforce, but they're changing what they're doing and changing either the location as far as the company, but even maybe their career path, that they've realized that, hey, go in this direction with lots of travel and big stuff isn't really what I want long term, because it's tough to raise a family that way.
I like that terminology change of resignation to migration, because you're right. It's not like people are just retiring at 25. They're going and doing something else. And I think it's important for leaders to dive in and find out what those things are that they're leaving for. But let's talk about the role specifically that kind of appreciation and recognition play in maybe retaining some of these employees. Is this, when we talk to our clients and partners, I mean, employee and staff turnover is like the biggest thing that's on everybody's mind right now.
Right. So historically, employee recognition has worked in the terms of, and it started out really with focusing on what do you want people to do, sort of set up their goals, monitor it, and reward it, right? And so that tended to go into recognition and rewards, that they would get recognized in front of the large group, usually, an annual meeting or maybe quarterly or something, and then some kind of bonus or something along with that. And that's fine when it's focused on performance. But what we've seen, and our real focus is that employees are people, and that they have lives, and they want to be valued as a person, not just for what they get done. Yeah, work is about work, and we need to get it done, but there's more than that. And so what we found is that when people don't feel valued and appreciated, you're really at risk for losing them. One study showed 79% of the people who leave a job voluntarily cite a lack of appreciation as one of the main reasons they leave. Most managers and owners think that people leave for more money, and research clearly shows for 5 decades that's not true. That only 12% of employees say they're leaving for more money. They may get more money, but it's secondary, because leaving a job is sort of an emotionally taxing process, right? And so it takes an emotional driver to actually pull the trigger. And so it's when you just feel like, man, they don't give a rip about me or what I say or do, or they're just using me, then people leave.
Well, and it's become this kind of snowball effect too. And I can speak to it especially from the sports space where we are, where traditionally leaders have said, all right, if you don't want to work here, that's fine. We got a line of people out the door that want to work here. And we've totally seen that change, where a job application or a role that would have got 300 applications is now getting 3. And right. It's a huge issue. But let's talk maybe about some specific ways that we can deliver better appreciation in the workplace. I know you've got a great book called 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about kind of the first, how you came together with the book, and then
Sure.
Obviously the book explains a lot of tactics for how we can get into delivering better appreciation in the workplace.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist by training, and I grew up in the context of a family-owned business, and for a period of my career, I consulted with family-owned businesses and dealing with the relational issues involved working together, as well as transferring it across generations. And I had an experience where I was meeting with a dad who was the CEO, and we were in the middle of the succession plan. I said, how's it going? He says, it's going well. My son's stepping up. I think it's going to be okay. I walked across the hall, asked the son the same question. He says, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. I can't ever please my dad. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? And at the same time, personally, my wife and I were reading through Dr. Chapman's 5 Love Languages, which is, crazy, amazing book. It's sold 20 million copies in 50 languages. But I thought, I wonder if these principles can work in work-based relationships. So I pursued him for a year, finally got to him. We decided to work together, put together an online assessment, which we've now had over 300,000 people take, and then training materials. And so it's about appreciating the person. And it's not rocket science. I mean, one of the principles is not everybody feels appreciated in the same way, right? And so most of us intellectually assent to that, but we may not really implement that, partly because we don't know what else to do. So the 5 languages are words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and even physical touch, which is an interesting one in the sports world. And, they're the same as the 5 love languages, but they look differently in how they're applied. Words of affirmation are essentially words that are affirming. You're saying, hey, thanks for, getting here early, setting things up for the meeting so we're good to go when our customers arrive. A key part about words that most people miss is you've got to be specific. We have about 100,000 people on our newsletter list, and we do polls. And once we asked, what don't you like to hear? And one of the main things people don't like to hear in the workplace is good job. Mm-hmm. And the reason is it's just sort of vague, general. You can say it to anybody. It doesn't really take any thought. It's pretty impersonal. And so we really teach people to use a person's name. We like to hear a name. If you're going to write it, make sure you spell it correctly because, it doesn't seem real personal if you misspell their name. Be specific about what they did that you value. And then third, why it's important, either to you, to the company, to the client, so that they really get the connection. And when we do that, it makes sense. And words is the most commonly chosen language of appreciation. It's 46% of all employees, but it's still less than half of the employees. So if you only use words, you're still missing, half of your team members that may have a different language of appreciation.
So interesting. Yeah, I'll give a little tangent. I had never heard this before, but this girl that I'm dating right now, she was talking to me, and we were going into emotions and whatnot. And she used this term that I'd never heard before, which was toxic positivity. And I felt like that framed up what you're talking about so well. It's just this generic good job that doesn't really do anything, or, hey, we got this. It's like, do we have this? And so getting really specific, and I think about what you're saying as well is similar to kids, right? You're never just going to tell the kid, hey, good job. You want to be as specific as you can, give a name. And what was the framework you said? You said, give a name. You said,
be specific, and then why it's important.
And why it's important. I think that third piece probably gets lost a lot as well.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the other one. So we've got quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and physical touch as it relates to love languages. But how do those other ones apply to the workplace?
Well, they're integrals. The first 3, especially. Quality time's about 26% of the population, so 1 out of every 4 people. And it's actually changed over time. In the past, there was a saying, people don't leave a job, they leave a manager. It's less true than it used to be. Younger employees really are more concerned and value collegial relationships with their peers. So in the past, quality time maybe was individual time with your supervisor or manager, being able to share observations or just, hang out together or maybe get input. Now it's about going out to lunch or after work with your friends and your colleagues. And so it's really important. And quality time is one of the languages that we found that just identifying a person's language isn't sufficient. You got to know the specific action, because if it's a manager, I've had, some fairly introverted administrative assistants say, I don't want time with my supervisor. He's pretty intense and I'm shy, and it's just like, no thanks, let me out of here. I want to go hang out with my friends. And so you got to get the action right, otherwise you still miss the target. Acts of service is not rescuing a low-performing colleague. It's those things that you can do that can help make somebody's day or week go better. And probably the best context is when you're pushing on a time-limited project that you're just banging on, trying to get it done, working hard and long. What's something somebody can do to help make that go better? Whether that's bring you in lunch so you can keep working. It could be, handle your phone calls or emails, and so you can keep focused on the project. Maybe even delegate part of the project to them so they can work on that while you're working on this. And that's about 21%, so 1 out of every 5 people. And I had a CEO tell me, he said, my language is get her done. He said, don't give me stuff, don't tell me stuff, just help me get things done. I know you're on my team. And these are the people that where words are only not important, they can be negative, because for them, lots of times the saying that's meaningful to them is, words are cheap, don't tell me, you support me, show me. And so you've got to really get it done with them. And it's really specific to what the job role or industry is. I mean, we work with mining companies, with schools, hospitals, government agencies, all different kinds of things. And then you have the roles in there, whether it's IT or accounting or marketing. And so you got to find out what's important to them. And again, our online assessment called the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory identifies not only a person's language, but the specific actions within that language that's important to them. Third one that we touch on is tangible gifts. It's not bonuses, raises, compensation. That's between the employer and the employee. It's just small things to show that you're getting to know the other person. You know, maybe you go to a game, a rivalry. You know, let's say it's the Iron Bowl. You know, between Alabama and Auburn. I lived in Atlanta for a while, and man, church the day after the Iron Bowl was pretty tense because you had people on both sides. And but you know, maybe they bring you, you know, something from you know, in Alabama or the program or whatever, and it's like it's not a big deal, but you just know that, you know, they'd be interested in it, you know. And so, or it could be their favorite cup of coffee, or, you know, seasonal kind of you know, pumpkin spice drink or whatever, their favorite candy bar snack or whatever. So it's more about getting to know them as a person.
I feel like knowing the favorite food in the workplace, bringing in some Krispy Kreme donuts or Chick-fil-A. If you bring me Chick-fil-A, I will know that I'm appreciated.
And the thing about that, if you bring in, let's say, donuts or order pizza in, the way to individualize that is make sure you know what people like and get that. So I had a team member that liked, you know, the maple long john kind of log things, and made sure that we got that for her, you know, and so that she knew we were thinking about her and knew that she liked that. So interestingly, you know, employee recognition programs spend a lot of money on gifts and stuff, but only 6% of the employees say that that's the main way they want to be shown appreciation. I've had people say, hey, if I never hear anything, nobody stops by to see how I'm doing, and, you know, don't help me out when I got a project, and then they give me something, especially if it's, you know, sort of logo wear from the organization, it feels pretty superficial, right? And so it's really, in this context, it is the thought that counts, that you're thinking about them and getting to know them.
That makes
tangible gifts. So then you have physical touch, which is the one that people always like, oh, really, in the workplace. And there's some differences regionally, but basically it's spontaneous celebration, right? It's a high five when you finish a project. It's a fist bump when you solve a problem, maybe a congratulatory handshake when you land a contract. You know, in the Northeast, I speak up in New York, New Jersey, you know, this is what physical touch looks like there. Hey, you know, I mean, you just sort of nod and greet them across the room. In the South, lived in Atlanta, you know, they do side hugs and that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then you got, you know, cultural issues. I mean, ethnicities. I mean, our Hispanic friends, you know, are more physical and kiss on the cheek when they greet each other. So you got to pay attention to it. It's only 1% of the population. But I had a CEO of a hospital, actually. He took our inventory, and we don't have physical touch in there because of sort of the high negativity and to low, you know, base rate. And he said, I was really disappointed that physical touch wasn't there. And I said, really? And in fact, he's a former military guy, and his HR director said, you know, I don't think he's going to get into this, you know, language of appreciation stuff. He said, you know, he played sports, and he misses the high fives and the fist bumps, you know, because that doesn't happen a lot in the workplace. So, you know, it's not real common. You got to be careful about it. Obviously, the person who's receiving always gets to draw the boundaries, but it's there.
So, I mean, there are so many intricacies within each one of these from the way that you just described it. What are some ways that managers can go about finding out the love languages, or not the love languages, the languages of appreciation in the workplace with their team? Yeah,
you know, we've worked on this quite a bit, and you know, it's not the kind of question that you can ask easily. I mean, it's not like, hey, I want to show you appreciation, what should I do? It's sort of a weird conversation in our culture. Secondly, to try to just watch them is tough because there's not, you know, that many data points. And plus, we found out that about 75% of the time people start by using the language that's important to them, but 25% of the time they do something else, especially gift givers. A lot of gift givers like to give gifts, but they don't necessarily like to receive gifts. It's not that meaningful to them. So that's why, you know, with our book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, we actually include a code for our online assessment so people can try it out and see. And then you can buy codes to take, have your team members take it because it's more important to find out what other people's languages are. And then we have tools where you can, create a PowerPoint slide that has everybody's languages and actions and a group summary and that kind of stuff. So, it sounds maybe sort of self-serving, but we haven't figured out any other way to really get to it except from there. Also, if you ask somebody, how should you show me appreciation? They're basically going to say, I don't know, tell me thanks. And that's about all you get. And so you don't really get the breadth of the possibilities out there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think even your code and going to the book and figuring that out and having employees kind of take that assessment to kind of figure out what is their best way is a great way to do it. I mean, I know from our time at Disney, we used to have a form for all new employees that said, we're all ears. And on it, you kind of fill out what's the best way you want to be recognized, who are your favorite characters, that sort of thing. But even then, to your point, I mean, this is like the case with any kind of survey. People are only going to give you kind of what's top of mind. You're not going to necessarily get to the deeper core of things when you're just asking questions like that, unless you're going into some type of deeper assessment. So all of this kind of seems like a lot of work, right? If I know this is something that we butt up against in the sports space of people running 1,000,000 miles a minute. I'm on from one event to the next event. This is just kind of how things work. How can senior leaders justify this investment of energy, time, and resources in appreciation? How can we tie that to the bottom line?
Yeah, well, let me address this first. How can you justify it? First of all, there's a couple of misconceptions. One is that, appreciation is the same as employee recognition, which we know that's not true. Appreciation is just words. We know that's not true. And then a third one is that appreciation really is the sole responsibility of leaders and managers and supervisors, which is not true as well. You don't have the time, you don't have the energy, you're not connected with everybody. So we really focus on teaching team members as well as supervisors how to show appreciation to one another so that they take responsibility. And it's interesting, frontline workers really like this because they find it sort of interesting to find out about themselves and other people and then implement it. So it's more about showing appreciation to the people that you work directly with, because really appreciation is about the person. So you got to have a relationship. If you try to show appreciation to somebody you don't even really know, it comes across a bit weird and maybe disingenuous. So there's that part. And the number one sort of pushback on this is people are busy, right? I mean, it's like, how am I going to do this? And, I tell them, as a psychologist, I'm supposed to be an expert in behavior change, both for individuals and groups. And I promise you, we're not going to create another to-do list. You got too many already. You got at least two, right? Your regular one and your project one. You don't need a recognition or appreciation one. And what we found is you can do what you're already doing or almost doing and tweak it just a little bit to make it work. And the key is to find out what the language and actions are that are important to the recipient, to the other person, and be able to communicate that in a specific way. We don't want you writing notes to everybody. We don't want you checking into everybody. It's a bunch of wasted time and energy. Find out what that one person wants and, shoot the arrow that way. And what we found is when team members feel valued and appreciated, lots of good things happen. One is busyness goes down because you're not dealing with stupid little conflicts that, sort of crop up when people don't feel valued about, their schedule or their parking spot or the size of their monitor or whatever it is. That kind of stuff sort of melts away when people know you value them. And then we've got, boatloads of research. I got 50 research citations in our book on the value. We know that, in fact, the Harvard Business Review just came out with another study that showed that when there's a significant difference between organizations and businesses that their team members feel valued and those that don't, in terms of both productivity and profitability. One study showed that teams that feel valued and appreciated produce 22% more than those that don't. So it reduces absenteeism, tardiness, turnover is huge. It reduces staff conflict. It increases customer ratings because the team members are now really sort of responding in a positive way to other people. It increases managers' enjoyment of their job. And so because they're not having to deal with all these stupid little problems and conflicts. So it's not, a misconception is that appreciation is just about sort of making people feel good. Yeah, that's nice. We want that to happen. But, in the business, it's more than that. It's about, I use the analogy of it's like oil in a machine, right? If a machine doesn't have oil, it sticks, it creates heat, tension, sparks. Same thing, an organization without appreciation just doesn't run well. And when there's appreciation there, it smooths it out and helps it run effectively and, get the tasks done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we do a lot of work on the customer experience side, and in the customer experience side, we're constantly focused on how might we remove friction from the customer experience perspective to create happiness. It's the same concept on the employee side of what I hear you saying is, as a manager or a leader, all the fires and things that you're putting out are usually because at the root of it, somebody doesn't feel
Somebody's been out of shape.
Yeah, that's right.
It's right.
For some reason or another, why you can't, all the different things that you hear. And so if we spend a little bit more time on the appreciation side, it would make sense that all the things that you just said, all the statistics that you just listed for us. One thing I want to go back to a little bit was talking about this dispersal of the responsibility to appreciate, moving that back down and encouraging other team members to appreciate their colleagues. What are some of the ways that managers can encourage or incentivize their colleagues to kind of recognize each other and appreciate each other a little bit more? What are some ways that leaders can encourage that type of behavior?
Well, sometimes I say that psychologists, focus on the obvious, and here's an obvious one, and it's that they should model it first, right? When possible. I mean, to be honest, rarely do we go into an organization and sort of implement this top down, because largely the C-suite of large organizations aren't really interested in this stuff.
Right.
But you go into the administrators, the managers, supervisors that see the pain both for themselves and their people. They say, we need this. And so often we'll start there. It then grows. We went all the way across the country in Miller Coors and DirecTV. We're working with Samsung and Caterpillar now. And so it's, if you're not interested, I just tell people, hey, not everybody is interested in this. Just stand to the side. Don't become obstructive about it, but maybe support your team, provide the resources for them to get the books, their codes, have some training done. We have an online train the trainer course so that you don't have to bring in an external trainer where you can do that, but you can also train your own HR person to do this. And just provide the resources for them to be able to run with it. And usually it just sort of goes viral from there, because people say, hey, how come they get to do this and we're not, and they see the authenticity of it. And that's the key part. I mean, we talk about authentic appreciation. We're not here to teach people how to look like they appreciate people. And we deal with the issue if you don't, appreciate what do you do, somebody, what do you do with that? So.
Beautiful. One other topic I want to talk about here while we're on this concept of kind of driving it to the bottom line. What's the value? How do we disperse it and ultimately create more value for the business? We started off with talking about the Great Resignation and employees leaving. Are there data or trends that you've seen around the cost of replacing employees and how appreciation might stem that? I mean, what have you seen from that side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of good data about that, and it's at least usually 2 to 3 times the cost of their salary, right? And it goes up the higher up the ladder you go for the position. So, and in fact, I don't have those numbers memorized, but we have it reported in our book where it's huge. In fact, I mean, replacing staff is the highest non-productive cost for every organization. And that
tell me more.
Well, it doesn't add any value to your organization, but it takes time. I mean, think about the cost. You have loss of relationships, right? You have loss of sort of company and organizational history of how you've done things in the past and how these people respond, your clients responded to certain kinds of initiatives. Some worked well for some and not for others. You have the whole issue of overload. This is huge in some industries now, healthcare, long-term care, where when there's a space empty, somebody's picking it up I mean, usually it's not getting done. I mean, occasionally, but so then you're stressing your staff out more, which then means puts them at risk for leaving, but also being sick, less productive. The training time that it takes, obviously, you're not getting as much done when somebody's being trained and the person who's training them is doing it. So there are hidden costs lots of times, unless you also do, searches and then interviews and then, signing bonuses, all that kind of stuff, it'll whack you pretty hard.
Got it. And you said, I think the number that you said, again, we'll do some of our own research here and link to some of this in the show notes and put some of that data in there. But I think you said when an employee leaves, you're ending up spending 2 to 3 times the amount of that salary of that employee and just replacing it, time loss, productivity, all that. Is that right?
Exactly. And I think the part that people really miss is the relationship loss, because, I mean, that's how business works, right? I mean, yeah, you can do a quote and all that, but that's why people play golf together. That's why they go fishing together. And they do deals while they're playing tennis or whatever. And so, you lose that relationship, and it's tough to rebuild.
On the sports side of things, I mean, that's an interesting point too. I mean, as a fan, if you've got a ticket sales team, and there's a lot of turnover in that business alone on that side of the house around ticket sales, as a fan, you loved it because you had a guy, and that was your guy, right, and you could call and they could solve problems for you. And when that person leaves, that's just a little tear in the relationship between the bigger brand and that fan, that customer. And it takes time to rebuild that relationship.
Yeah, I think a misconception that a lot of the leaders have is that they think organizations have relationships with organizations. They don't. I mean, Pepsi doesn't have a relationship with, I got to think one that they don't own, but but it's about people within the organization, and so you lose that, and it just makes life a lot tougher.
Let's talk about kind of the differences in generations, and now at this point, right, we've got Gen Z starting to come into the workplace. You've got your millennials, Gen X's, a lot of boomers still around in the sports space. A lot of them are still in those senior leader positions. What are some of the biggest similarities or core differences in the ways that these different generations prefer to be recognized?
Yeah, I'm actually just had a research paper accepted by Strategic HR Review where we studied 190,000 people.
Wow.
And divide them into 7 age groups from 19 below up to 70 and above. And a couple themes. One is generally the patterns stay the same, that words are the most desired by every generation, quality time second, acts of services next, and then tangible gifts is way down there. But younger employees clearly value quality time more than their older colleagues and compatriots, and so that getting together and hanging out together and doing things together is really important to them, even to the point that for some of them, and a lot of them, it's more important than other kinds of things, than money or recognition. And interestingly, time also plays in there in the sense, in our context, tangible gifts of flex time, right? When you've been traveling a lot and putting in some time, getting a Friday off or, leave early on the day you return or whatever, that's really important. Older employees, you hear the stories about, you get a watch at retirement or something like that. It's virtually meaningless to older employees to get some kind of tangible gift and the certificate to hang on their wall. I mean, where are they going to hang it? So you have to pay attention to the fact that, and what's interesting on our assessment, we identify a person's least valued language, which is your one that you don't really care about. If your language is quality time, your lowest language is quality time, and you have team members that have that, we got to help you figure out a plan how to make that happen, whether it's you or for your team. And so that, along with it, we have a sort of expanded version that identifies how people don't want to be shown appreciation, because you don't want to sort of do something that messes them up. 40% of employees don't want to go in front of a large group to be recognized. And I had one CFO tell me, she said, I got Employee of the Year and the big thing. And she said, I spent 15 to 20 minutes prior to getting the award in the bathroom throwing up. It was just like, creating all kinds of anxiety for her. And it's like, well, that was really not in the right way, but it was like we didn't really show her appreciation. We created stress for her.
Yeah. And that's why, again, going back to your point earlier of really understanding at the individual level, how is it that person wants to be appreciated? You can't have, it's okay to have a global platform or a global program, but it's got to be individualized to the individual person getting it. It's such an individual thing.
Yeah. And let me give a tip to leaders about that. I mean, you can't know everybody and, connect with everybody. So you got to figure out, there's sort of three groups to think about. One, remember that statistic, 79% of the people who don't feel valued leave. If you've got a key team member that you don't want to lose, you better make sure that they know that you value and appreciate them. Otherwise, they're on the trading block. I mean, somebody's either out coming to them or they're looking. Secondly, an easy win is to start with the people around you that if they didn't do what they do every day, your life would be a lot tougher at work. And you want to make sure that you know that you observe that and value that and appreciate them. And the third group are people that are discouraged, right? I mean, people that are working hard on stuff and they're just hitting challenges and barriers from whether it's COVID or the economy or whatever, and they're doing a good job, but it's just not getting it done. It's really important. And one of the things we found is appreciation. The 5 languages work both for appreciation, which is about the past, things they've done, and it's also effective for encouragement, the present and the future, coming alongside and say, hang in there, and, if somebody's got quality time, you say, hey, let's go out and have a drink after work or, go grab a bite to eat. And investing that time can be really encouraging to them and help keep them going and motivate them.
That made me just think of something. I think something else leaders struggle with from what we've seen in our work is if I've got an employee that's underperforming, I'm quick to write them off. How do I show appreciation from someone if they're underperforming? But oftentimes they might be underperforming because they've got so much work on them that there's no other option. They can't possibly meet the expectations. So how do leaders balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question, David, and it goes to the heart of sort of what we're about in that actually recognition programs only tend to hit the top 10 or 15% of a workforce. They're sort of your key team players. That means you got 50 to 60% of people in the middle that are doing a decent job, best they can, potentially, showing up, doing the work. They don't hear anything. They're at risk for leaving. And that's where appreciation fits because we are people and we have characteristics that are valuable besides just performance, right? And I have twin sons. They're now adults, but first 2 years were hell, man. I mean, sleep deprivation to the max, and I was not the best at my job, right? But I didn't need, sort of a rah-rah kind of thing or a goal. I just needed some support. And so sometimes we focus on what's going on with them otherwise. I mean, personally, I like to work with cheerful people rather than grumpy people. It's not going to show up on their performance review, but man, I'm going to take a B player who's cheerful and easy to get along with rather than an A player that's just a jerk, And so, you can focus on that. Or it can be that, let's say you got a single mom working for you that she's just super committed to her kids, and you call her out and say, man, Marta, I'm so impressed with how much you love your kids, you're there for them. It's not about work, but it's showing value, that you value what she's doing and who she is. And it creates a sense of relationship and loyalty. She's not going to be going anywhere if you support that. So, and then what happens is those people, hang in there and often grow. I mean, think about we're in football season right now. I mean, if you have a team and you got, great quarterback, running back, wide receivers, but your line sucks, they're not going to do anything much very often. Because you got to have the solid middle players too, and so that's the same way on work teams. Not everybody's a star, but you need those solid middle people to get the task done.
100%. I love that you kind of called out that this middle group, which is the majority of the employees, are really underappreciated. And if they're not pulling their weight and they're not being productive and feeling appreciated, it's hard for the high performers to sustain what they're doing.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about maybe some trends that you're interested in right now in this space. Things that you're seeing. Obviously, you just did a big research paper, so maybe that's the biggest thing that you're interested in right now. But are there other kind of fringe trends in this appreciation, recognition, employee experience space that you're interested in keeping your eye on?
Well, sure. I mean, in the last year and a half, I mean, there's been a lot of change in the workforce as far as working from home and remotely. And so we actually created a virtual training kit that you can do by Zoom, and also a form of our assessment that's remote, because the actions look different. I mean, how do you spend quality time remotely or in active service? So focusing on that. And let me just say what we learned from doing some research again on that was that sort of three key parts. One is if you have remote or hybrid workers, you need to be proactive in showing appreciation, because you don't have those sort of spontaneous situations where they stop by your office and stick your head in, or you see them in the break room or coming in. So it's sort of like, if you don't reach out to them and ping them, it's not going to happen. Secondly, it's not just about the manager, it's about peers, right? That you want to encourage your team to stay connected with one another. And then the third part is that it needs to have some aspect of personal communication, that it's not just about, hey, how's that project going or how the task's going, but hey, did you, I got to go to a soccer game with a friend this weekend. It was sort of cool, state championships, and whatever you want to share. And I tell leaders, don't turn into sort of the interrogator where you're always asking people, but share a little bit about yourself and say, I got to go sailing this weekend with my brother, or whatever it might be. And being able to, it's really critical that I feel bad for groups that are just going to try to go totally virtual. I don't think that's sustainable without having touch points along the way where people meet, because you can only build a relationship to a certain level virtually. I understand the practical aspect of doing that, but I think there's got to be some personal interaction as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. And our team actually has always been fully distributed. When I worked at Disney, I had a role where I was work from home as well. And so I've been doing this for 7-8 years. When we created EngageMint, it was like, let's go grab the best talent from all around the world, or not around the world, but around the US. And at one point we had people in every single time zone in the US. But you're right, we had to be super, super intentional about it. I mean, one of the easy things that we did for recognition was bringing in custom Slack emojis. All our communication is on Slack. And so rather than when somebody did a good job, just giving them the thumbs up emoji, which can often feel very bland, we brought in all these custom emojis like Borat cheering, or, Mario Brothers dancing up and down. And it gives a little bit more personality, but it still doesn't replace the times when we're able to get together in person, because that's when you really start to see who the person is, what they care about, and you got to have that touchstone piece. I think you're right. What are some opinions that you hear in your area of expertise here that you just disagree with, and why would that be?
Well, I will sometimes, I don't know if it's often, but I'll sometimes hear people say, we pay people and that's our appreciation. It's like, and or from a boomer up, it's like, well, nobody patted me on the back growing up and I turned out fine. So, they just need to grow up. Maybe, I don't know, the issue, people really do want to be appreciated. Should they? I don't know, but it's reality. And so either we live in reality or we, fight it. The people that have that kind of attitude tend to have the highest turnover rates, and also lowest morale, and have to work really hard. And they tend to be sort of very, control, power driven about stuff, and punitive as well. And so, live how you want, but I don't think it's going to work.
That makes sense. I remember hearing this stat a long time ago. I'll have to look it up. But it was something like, once you make $70,000 or more, incremental salary on top of that, very, very small impact on quality of life. Because at that point, once you're making more than 70,000, you've got all your needs taken care of for the most part. You can pay your bills, you can pay off debt a little bit if you're saving, and so salary increases has very, very marginal impact on quality of life, where appreciation can really drive that.
And we're looking towards the holidays here, and thinking about, what's the most important sort of commodity people have, and it's time, right? I mean, when are they going to run errands? When are they going to go shopping? When are they going to be able to take their kids to go shopping? When, all the preparation stuff. And so instead of giving people things like your employees, giving them some time off can be a huge win. It doesn't cost you a lot usually, and it helps impact their life. So any kind of free time or flex time could be a huge impact in building positive things within your teams.
Love it. All right, I want to get into here last couple minutes. What are some of the most creative recommendations or creative activations, practices that you've seen for appreciation? Like some of your favorite all time?
I have this mining company that I work with in South Dakota and Wyoming and Colorado. And, you don't think about appreciation with tough guy kind of, industries, but they just latched onto this, and we wound up taking it throughout the whole organization down to the cement truck drivers and, the miners and all that. And they wanted to we have little visual symbols of each of our languages, and they wanted to get stickers to put on their hard hats for that. And they wanted to make it sort of a deal that you had to be there past 90 days for your probation, before you could actually go through the process. So it was a little bit of, earn your keep kind of thing. But it was just cool to me that they liked it enough to want to put it on their hard hats.
And the impact that had, I'm guessing, is people were easily able then to customize how they showed appreciation. They didn't just give it based on how they want to receive it. They gave it based on the individual.
Yeah, and actually probably the bigger impact is that it's just a reminder about communicating appreciation. So it just makes it part of your mindset of daily life as you work with your colleagues.
Beautiful. Let's hear another one. And I'm sure you're filled with stories on creative practices for appreciation.
Well, I had one group that was sort of at least a regional company, had different offices, but what they did is they created note cards stations that they basically gave and provided free note cards for people to be able to pick and write a note to somebody. They also created their own posters. They created T-shirts where they had their language on it, and they also had a celebration, and some people wrote some songs about the different languages. So it's fun when people sort of take who they are and their culture and incorporate this for what fits for them.
I love it. And again, if you're listening to this and you're in the sports and entertainment space, there are so many things from a culture perspective that you can use to drive appreciation or to give appreciation, but also drive loyalty to your brand and passion around your brand, because you've got so much IP and so many resources to be able to go do that. Well, Paul, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure we get in here in the last couple of minutes?
I think I just want to emphasize that, it can sound and feel overwhelming, like, I got to figure out what everybody wants and doesn't do that. It's more important, and, I work with computer and IT and engineer guys, and they want to, do a spreadsheet and, a Gantt chart and just get it all figured out. But then they never actually do anything. And so I just encourage people, start somewhere with someone. Okay, and using words is probably the easiest and it's the safest. You can say something to somebody and be specific and tell them why it's important. Or if you're introverted, just write them a note in a handwritten note. That's generational differences. 20-something guys don't give a rip about a handwritten note. I mean, just don't spend the time on it. I mean, it's more important about the speed in which you get back to them, as far as if they did something the next day or two. After 2 days, you're sort of into history, so you need to get back to them. But just think of somebody that, like we talked about, if they didn't do what they do, your daily life would be tougher. And just communicate that to them, and you'll see how easy it is. And then see, sort of check out and see if there's somebody else that would be interested in pursuing this, because it's easier to sort of have a team member that you can do it together versus trying to push it by yourself. Beautiful.
And so many different ways to be able to give appreciation. And Dr. White, I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it. If people want to learn more about your programs, your book, obviously we've talked about it a little bit here on some of the great work that you're doing with organizations to help them create a culture where appreciation is a high priority. where can they find you? What are some of the resources that you've got available for people to get started?
Yeah, sort of the mothership website is just appreciationatwork.com, and it's the word at, so appreciationatwork.com. It's got our books, it has the inventories, training materials, and different. We have a new book coming out in January about resolving, both avoiding and resolving conflict in the workplace. We have some stuff on how to survive toxic workplaces if you happen to be in that, or maybe your spouse does. But anyway, yeah, appreciationatwork.com, and if they got questions, whether there's an admin email, you can just ping us and we'll get a hold of them and find out what's up.
Perfect. Are there any other places where you're putting out content or whatnot so people can follow along, maybe a Twitter handle or anything like that?
Yeah, I do a little bit of Twitter, but probably my blog. I mean, do a weekly blog, which is just part of the website. A couple weeks ago, I was interviewed by the BBC News. Recently, cited by Harvard Business Review. So that'll probably get you the where you need to go. Facebook as well, but and I'm on LinkedIn, just Dr. Paul White.
BBC News, Harvard Business Review, Flip the Switch with Engagement. I mean, you're on
there
all
you go.
You're on
all
the highest outlets. So, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show, and really looking forward to our next conversation.
All right, thanks so much for having me.
Hey guys, before you head out, just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That helps more of your peers find the show as they search for ways to get better in their own roles. But this podcast is just a small part of what we do at EngageMint. In our normal day in the office, we're crazy focused on helping athletic departments and sports and entertainment companies generate more revenue by becoming more customer-centric. To see how we might be able to help your organization, visit EngageMintPartners.com to learn more. Download a free guide, check out our blogs and case studies, or schedule a call with us if you want to see how we can help with your particular objectives. Our goal is to help you create deeper connections with fans and generate more revenue. So when you're with us, hopefully you find a nugget or two that helps your cause.